Hello and welcome. We are about to embark together on a pilgrimage to a sacred site called Delphi that is perched on the southern slope of Mount Parnassus in the very heart of Greece. If I had to pick one site from all of those that we are going to visit that has meant the most to me, it is certainly Delphi, the seat of the ancient oracle of Apollo, which was consulted over at least 1,000 years and perhaps almost 2,000 years by ancient people from all over the Mediterranean world and beyond. People who came to seek the wisdom of the god as they faced difficult choices in their life. Now, I've called it Delphi. You may also hear it referred to as Delphi. Which is correct? Neither. So it really doesn't matter which we English-speaking people choose as our pronunciation of the site. The Greeks call it Delphoi, and that is the proper name for this sanctuary of Apollo. I urge you to get to Delphi the day before you plan to visit the site, because you are going to want to settle into the lovely little modern village of Delphi, which was only founded in the 1890s, which is around the shoulder of Mount Parnassus to the west of the main sanctuary site. Settle into a hotel. Perhaps go ahead and see the sanctuary in the afternoon and evening light. Sometimes it stays open well into the evening hours in summer. But certainly you will want to see it in the cool of the day, morning or evening, and I believe you're going to want to enjoy the pleasure of this beautiful town with its spectacular views out toward the blue Corinthian Gulf and to the mountains that encircle it, as well as some of the most pleasant tavernas and workshops in all of Greece. I enjoy going to see some of the places where ancient crafts and modern crafts exist side by side. There's a shop in Delphi where they sell as antiquities old Greek agricultural implements from 19th and early 20th century farms. A fascinating place. And believe me, the proprietors are always willing to talk to you about their enthusiasms. In another shop, I found a potter hard at work recreating with delicate strokes of his brush the beautiful patterns and designs on the ancient vases that had been found at Delphi during the archaeological digs, vases that were then for sale. And he was willing to talk at great length about his own insights into the ancient art because he had tried to copy it himself by hand. Having enjoyed the town of Delphi, one way or another, it's time for us to start our own pilgrimage to the prophetic shrine. And I recommend beginning by going all the way past the main gate that takes you into the sanctuary of Apollo to a sharp bend in the main road, overshadowed by great plane trees, where you will hear the bubbling, frothing water of the sacred spring, Castalia. That cold water from Mount Parnassus is the place of purification, both for the Pythia, the priestess who is going to give you your oracle, and for you yourself as a pilgrim to the site. Across the road, you can look down on the lower sanctuary, the sanctuary of approach for those ancient people, those pilgrims who came to Delphi by boat, far away there at Itaea or one of the other ports that you can see down on the far side of the plain along the waters of the Gulf. They would come across the plain, they would ascend the lower parts of the mountain, come to this lower sanctuary of purification, make their sacrifices to Athena, goddess of wisdom, who had a temple down there. And also, if they were going to participate in the sports in honor of Apollo, the Pythian Games, they had their practice running track and their bathhouse and their big circular tub that looked like a jacuzzi, which you can still see, a giant thing, down on that lower shelf. But we, having purified ourselves by our visit to the Castalia Spring, we want to turn now and go onward along the slope of the mountain to the west till we come to the gates into the sanctuary. If it were a day of consultation, back in the ancient world, it would have been the 7th day after the new moon that began the month, the day that was holy to the god Apollo, just as the 6th day was holy to his sister Artemis. We would have come on this 7th day because this is the day when the woman, the Pythia, the priestess, is going to actually enter the temple for only one day a month sit herself down on a tripod that is positioned in a crypt down in the heart of the temple, breathe in vapors coming up from the rock of Mount Parnassus, and in an altered state, in a trance, become a medium through which the god will speak. She has preceded us to the sacred spring. She has bathed in it in the early morning light, prepared herself, purified herself. Probably she's fasted for at least 3 days to be ready for this supreme physical test of going into the trance. We have not seen her. She's been surrounded by priests. She came early. She's already been led up to the temple. But now it's our turn as visitors to go into the gates and go up to our first meeting place, our first spot where we will feel the magic of Delphi start to surround us. That spot is something that wasn't there in the classical Greek period. It's a little Roman forum, added when the Romans took over Greece and found that they loved to go to Delphi. Delphi was in fact one of the first places where tourism became a business, and there were professional guides to lead Roman visitors and other visitors around the site and show them the marvels of sculpture and architecture and historic monuments. In that Roman agora, which you can easily pick out because it's all brick, or brick mixed with stone, that's the sign of Romans and Byzantines. Greeks, classical Greeks, didn't use brick as a building material. So when you see that brick and the beautiful colonnades and the niches behind the columns, you know you're looking at a Roman piece of work. And here is where souvenirs were sold. People could buy little statuettes of Apollo, other symbols of the shrine, like the tripod on which the Pythia sat, or the omphalos, the belly button stone, which marked the center of the world, which Delphi claimed to be. Once we have met our friends there, explained what we're doing there, if it's a day of consultation, this is probably the place where the priests of the temple of Apollo will get us in line in order of precedent. Very important people, generals, heads of state, ambassadors from Greek city-states or foreign kingdoms, famous athletes, whoever they are, they're going to be at the front of the line, and we ordinary folk are trailing back down the hillside. All in order of precedence. Cities could pay a big fee in order to get right to the front of the line if they wanted to on that 1 day a month consultation. And it wasn't even 12 months a year. The Delphic oracle closes, like so much else in Greece, for the winter, and Apollo was believed to go away to another place while his dark-minded half-brother Dionysus, lord of the irrational, took over the temple and the sanctuary in his place. No oracles in winter. Now we are in our line. It's still probably dim dawn light at this point. Greeks do get up early to start the day because they're probably going to take a big chunk out of the middle of the day for sleeping and getting in and out of the hot sunshine. But we are ready now. The gates of the sanctuary will open. It's surrounded by a big wall to enclose all the sacred treasures and the temple that are inside. And we are now led in procession through that gate and up the sacred way. We are today walking on a pavement that was paid for by the Romans, probably the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who loved the Greek world and who provided millions, as we would put it, in Roman funding to refurbish and glorify the monuments and the sacred sites of this Greece that was so dear to him. Think of the Hadrianic love that went into those paving stones beneath your feet, and notice also that they're gridded with little corduroy grooves that make the ascent less slippery. That's not really for you. That's more for the sacred goat, which was led up in the dawn before you went there, taken into the temple to be sacrificed. If the goat shuddered or acted fearful or stumbled, the sacrifice was unfavorable and the consultations are canceled for the day. The omens were unfavorable. And so you would have to wait for another month in Delphi till the 7th day of the next month came around. And you had plenty to entertain you. There was a theater, there were athletic events, lots of good talk with philosophers and folks, travelers from all over the world. As the Delphic people like to say, they who dwelt in that little mountain village, we would be the poorest people in Greece if it were not for this oracle. So we have to reflect on the fact that in the Greek world, religion did have its financial and economic side. But let's say that the goat did not misbehave on this, our day. We are led up to the first switchback with war monuments and treasuries of different Greek states on either side, the treasuries being little rectangular buildings that look like miniature temples in which the inhabitants of Thebes or Athens or Sparta or some of the islands will have left treasures, offerings to the god to show their appreciation for what he's done in showing them the right choices to make as they steer their way through the world. The treasury of the Athenians has been pretty much reconstructed intact, and on the outside, a hymn to the sun, Helios, had been engraved in ancient times. And fascinatingly enough, given that the young god Apollo, that god who never grows up, he's always the perfect youth, the perfect athlete, the perfect lover, and the perfect musician, he was the god of music and musical inspiration. So it's fitting that hymns should be present in his sanctuary, and that this hymn had the little markings on it, the extra symbols and letters, which indicated the note to which each syllable should be sung. So here is a hymn, now some 2,000 years old, that we can recreate and hear, with the ancient music accompanying it, a truly extraordinary way to hear the past echoing in our own time. So we are at this first switchback, and what do we see? We see one of those omphalos stones, those belly button stones in front of us. Now that stone is the sort of branding mark of Delphi. It is the emblem of the shrine. It is believed to mark the center of the world, the belly button. Omphalos means navel, the belly button of Mother Earth. This was, according to the Delphians and their myth, the spot where when Zeus released his two sacred eagles from the ends of the world and told them to meet in the middle of the world, to fly toward each other till they met at the center, this was the spot. Zeus set the sacred stone there to mark the middle of his world. So there's our omphalos, the first one we'll see, but there's another one, the real one, inside the temple that we will catch a glimpse of when we are conferring with the priestess herself in the dimness down there in the crypt. We keep on a little bit past the treasury of the Athenians and then look back beyond its uphill corner to an area of rocks where we'll probably see some greenery. Last time I was there was a little fig tree growing up. Fig trees love wet feet. Wherever you see a fig, you can be pretty sure there's some groundwater growing under that tree. And here the groundwater is the original sacred spring of Mother Earth herself. Her name was Ge, G-E. That's where we get geography and geology. The primal Earth Mother goddess of Greece. This was originally her shrine. Apollo was not here. But Apollo came as a boy seeking sanctuaries of his own. He was a brand new god let loose in creation, and he came to this spot where Mother Earth had been apparently prophesying through dreams to people, and he decided to take it over. She had set a great snake, almost a she-dragon, called Pytho, P-Y-T-H-O, to guard that site. And Apollo, who was an archer god, took his bow and arrow and shot that python. And by killing Mother Earth's sacred snake, he and his male priests became the dominant force at Delphi. And he ruled then. He was the voice that came out of the mouth of the Pythia. Mother Earth, though present, was demoted. You'll also see a big rock right next to the sacred way going up, a woman called the Sibyl, familiar to us from the stories of Virgil and Aeneas and the Sibylline prophecies over near Cumae in the Bay of Naples in Italy. A wandering Sibyl came to Delphi for a while and prophesied from the top of that rock. So it was believed that this was an area where all could be filled with a sort of prophetic spirit if the god willed it. Our last monument as we go up, on the left we will see the stoa or portico of the Athenians. A lovely set of steps crowned by a row of Ionic columns. A few of their shafts are still partly standing. This was a war monument that the Athenians had created to hold victory trophies from one of their naval battles, maybe even several of their naval battles. But on the back wall, look closely, you will see in minuscule letters thousands of inscriptions. These are very touching inscriptions to me. They are the names of freed slaves, recording their emancipation and making sure that the world knew it by the slaves having placed these inscriptions in this sanctuary at Delphi, where it would be a terrible act of sacrilege for any person to deface or erase them. Elsewhere in the wonderful setting at Delphi, there are more inscriptions about another very heartwarming incident. There was a time when the temple fell down in an earthquake, 372 or 373 BC. It took 50 years to raise the money to rebuild the temple. And it's the rebuilt temple that you see the remains of today when you get a little bit higher. The priests sent messengers all over the Mediterranean, all over the Greek world, hoping for contributions to rebuild the temple. And they promised that anyone who gave an offering would have their name inscribed. Well, they were true to that promise. The names are all there, found by the archaeologists when they excavated the slabs at Delphi. And they also recorded the amounts given. And in some cases, the amounts that those ancient people gave are less than the cost of inscribing their name. And yet the priests remain true to the promise. As we go up past a beautiful example of an Ionic column, archaeologists not sure exactly where it came from, make the final ascent and the hard left toward the temple, we suddenly see before us that place where we are going to enter to consult the oracle herself. It was a rare privilege to be allowed to enter a Greek temple. True temples like the Erechtheum in Athens, sacred to the city's goddess Athena, would only have been entered normally by the priests or priestesses who served the god in that temple. Ordinary people like us, we would have stayed outside in a little platform area in front of the temple, and there would have been an altar, and the altar at Delphi now is a huge thing just on our left here. There we would have made our offerings of animals or fruits or honey cakes or money or incense, and it would have been placed on the altar by the priests on our behalf, and then we would go away. But at Delphi it was different. There was the facade of the temple, the doors were open, and the line that we are following of people is going into the temple. We will enter the Holy of Holies itself to confront the God, speak to the God, and ask for guidance. And we must use our imaginations, because all of the sacred things I will be describing to you were utterly destroyed at the beginning of the Christian era, leaving behind nothing but the broken facade that we see before us now. There are two mottos on the outside of the temple, painted or carved. One says, "Gnothisi auton," know thyself. That's sort of the message of Platonic philosophy, but it's also a warning. The God here at Delphi, as the philosopher Heraclitus said, neither conceals nor reveals the truth. He will only give you a sign. You must know yourself in order to interpret it correctly. The other says, nothing too much. Well, there we have Aristotelian philosophy, but also we have a warning against excess in any direction. You've come to Delphi because you have a difficult choice. You have a problem in your life that you must get divine guidance to solve. These are the twin warnings to you, the twin admonitions, as you pass between them and enter the temple. Somewhere straight ahead of us is an eternal flame burning away. Women are tending that flame. They are part of a sacred sisterhood who has been dedicated to the service of the god Apollo, but they are descendants of those women who used to serve Mother Earth. From their number has been chosen the special woman who today will be down in the crypt, seated on the tripod, waiting for us to descend and ask our questions. All around us, offerings are hung, chariots, shields, weaponry, works of art, golden bowls from foreign monarchs, gifts to the temple from grateful consultants and pilgrims in the past. We pass the holy flame, we start to go down, as our name is called, down the long ramp or possibly set of stairs into the lower regions where the Pythia herself is seated. Somewhere ahead of us, at the high level or down in the crypt itself, is a solid gold statue of Apollo, probably holding his bow, the cult image of the god himself. Down in the sacred area, thus in the cella, C-E-L-L-A, the center of the temple, with the crypt or adyton, A-D-Y-T-O-N, the do not enter area off to your left, is a fair number of people, perhaps a number of consultants waiting together, some already having asked their questions, others about to go, certainly some priests, and on most occasions a guy named a prophetes. Prophetes means pro, for, speak, someone who speaks for somebody else or speaks in front of someone else. That's where we get our word prophet. They are men here at Delphi. They have little tablets and styluses, and in many books you will read they're the ones who really made up the oracles. That's not the case. Every ancient Greek consultant who wrote about the experience makes it clear that the woman spoke. It's just 19th and early 20th century male-dominated classical history that decided the most powerful voice in the Greek world couldn't belong to a countrywoman from Mount Parnassus. There has to be a male consciousness in between who would take the babblings of the woman, write down on the tablet a much better, more suitable, more efficient oracle, and give you that. No, what these guys are here for is if the woman speaks in ordinary prose and you want a verse oracle to take home, they will redo her words in poetry, lines of verse. You can pay them then and take that home as your fine poetical oracle from the shrine of Apollo. But the ancient sources make it clear, for all the strangeness of it, the god has chosen to speak through the mouth of a woman. And now it's our moment. We turn to the left, we're facing south, and there's that little niche, maybe not much bigger than a phone booth. Inside it, we can dimly make out the tripod, three-legged stand with the bowl on top. The woman is seated on a lid on top of the bowl. She appears to be in a trance state, but she's able to sit up, hold some sort of laurel branch. She's got a dish of sacred water in her hand, and we may be able to hear the bubbling of a spring that is coming up through a crack or seam, a sort of fault in the native rock of the mountainside that is visible under her tripod. She's sometimes described as eyes closed, certainly in a visible trance state, and certainly audibly not speaking with her normal voice, a low, raspy voice. We ask our question, and she responds, usually not in a direct answer, but in some lines of poetry that are cryptic, mysterious, riddling. The Athenians sent an ambassador when the Persians were invading, asking what they should do, and they were told by the Delphic oracle to abandon their city, but trust in their wooden wall. There's a riddle, but a statesman named Themistocles figured it out. We must evacuate Athens, but our manpower must trust to our wooden wall, the navy, and they did indeed fight the Persians at sea and beat them at the Battle of Salamis. As you can imagine, the Delphic oracle got a lot of prestige for that response. Once we have asked our question and received our answer, we must ascend that ramp or steps again and exit the temple. Now, we've been standing for a lot of this time in our current visit near the front of the temple, the facade, where you want to go to look down into the temple and see that crypt, that adyton, is upward on a flight of steps that will take you to a viewing place near a nice tree, if you care to sit down and sit in the shade, where you can look down into the temple. Please don't be disappointed by the temple. The French excavators were back in the 1890s. They'd worked long and hard for the permit to excavate Delphi. They'd expected to find fantastic sculptures such as the Germans had found at Olympia or the British and Americans on the Acropolis at Athens, and they found very little. The columns were all down. They did erect a number of the columns so you can get a sense of the height of the colonnade and the spacing of the columns around the temple. But as a compensation for the absence of all the beautiful, intricate masonry and architecture. We feel the natural sight coming through. The shrubs, the birds, the locusts, the bare slope of the mountainside. Delphi seems to be going, in some ways, back to nature. And the higher you ascend through the site, the more you will feel that. Having left the temple behind us, we would go to the beautiful theater of Dionysus, Apollo's half-brother, who ruled there in the wintertime. One of the best preserved in all of Greece, one of those that will indeed echo your voice back to you and fill the whole theater, even with just a whisper. And then on above the theater, the areas that many tourists never explore, to the sacred spring high up, and even beyond that to a fabulous stadium with much of its seating still intact. But the center of the mystery is the temple. The ancient Greeks had claimed there was a crack in the mountainside, that the woman was intoxicated in an altered state from a physical inducement, some sort of a vapor or gas that came up and that she breathed in, seated there on her tripod in the heart of the temple. Was that true? One of the greatest experiences of my life as an archaeologist was to meet a geologist, Jelle de Boer of Wesleyan University in Connecticut, who informed me that he had seen the fault that ran under the Temple of Apollo. I had been taught at college that that was all a myth. For 100 years, Western archaeologists and classicists had insisted there was no gas. It was all a confidence game on the part of the priests of Apollo at Delphi to fool credulous visitors into believing that the woman was really in some sort of altered state and really speaking of her own volition the words of Apollo himself. I was very excited when the geologist, Jelle de Boer, told me he'd seen the fault. I told him if he had really seen it, he'd made an amazing discovery because everyone else had missed it. And so we went back to Delphi. Spending weeks there in midwinter when tourists were few, we crawled all over the mountainside, identified more and more of the fault, ultimately brought in more scientists, chemists, toxicologists to analyze traces of gases, and we were able to show, after several years of work, that the rocks below the sanctuary are bituminous limestone. They have petrochemicals in them that when heated by the movement of the fault itself, which Jelle had seen, that fault which makes Delphi such an unstable place, and a movement of that fault triggered the earthquake that knocked down the temple. The heating of the fault with the friction of the rocks vaporized the petrochemicals and brought them up to the surface through the crack over which the temple had been built, and they came up as light hydrocarbon gases, methane, ethane, ethylene. Plutarch, who had been high priest at the temple, claimed that the gaseous emission smelled sweet, and ethylene is indeed one of the few sweet-smelling gases. So we were able to vindicate those ancient writers. We were able to vindicate all those eyewitnesses like Plutarch and others who had visited the shrine, who explicitly said the reason Delphi was planted where it was because of a unique situation in the mountain itself. The Greeks were very sensitive to landscape, to the natural settings, to the rocks, the trees, the springs. They read the landscape as we would read a book. And there were certain signs that said to them, this place is holy. At Delphi, that sign was a crack in the earth, a spring that sometimes bubbled up out of the crack, and a vapor that rose from it. Those who hung their head over experienced an altered state that they interpreted as the touch of the god. The temple is closed at Delphi now. The last Pythia gave her last oracle to the Emperor Julian the Apostate long ago, telling his ambassadors in the middle of the 4th century AD, "Go tell the king, the fair-built hall has fallen. Apollo has no temple here, no sacred tree, no talking spring. The water of speech is silent." And yet for each of us who visits Delphi today, the very rocks themselves, the magic of these surroundings and these fabulous ruins can allow for a little time the spirit of antiquity to speak again to each of us.